A man gets a mysterious package from his long-lost brother, but what's inside will leave him speechless. Before we dive in, share your thoughts in the comments. How would you react if someone you loved vanished without explanation? And if you enjoy stories filled with mystery and heartache, don't forget to like this video to support the channel. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Ever since the day Jack Marshall's younger brother Luke disappeared without a trace, life had felt like an unshakable weight. Jack had been just 21, an ambitious college student with plans for the future, when Luke, only 16, vanished from their lives. No notes, no phone calls, just an empty room and a trail of unanswered questions. Despite the frantic search, the police found nothing. No leads, no clues, just silence. The disappearance shattered their family. Their mother fell into a depression, and their father, already distant and withdrawn, became even more unreachable. Jack tried to hold it together for his family, but the void left by Luke's absence never healed. As the years passed, Jack found himself moving forward with life. He finished school, started his career, and began building a life of his own. But despite all his success, a part of him remained tethered to that moment, to the mystery of Luke's disappearance. He often wondered if his brother was still out there somewhere, living a different life, or if something darker had happened to him. But no matter how much he searched or tried to move on, the answers never came. Jack's life had settled into a routine. He'd found a steady job in marketing, and although he had friends and acquaintances, he kept a low profile, never getting too close to anyone. His family's quiet sadness became his own. He had learned to ignore the nagging feeling that something was missing. But one morning, on the anniversary of Luke's disappearance, Jack's life would be forever altered. The day started like any other, with Jack waking up early to get a head start on his work. He stepped outside to grab the mail and saw a plain, unmarked package sitting on his doorstep. No return address, no information, just a small, weathered box with a stamp that was barely legible. Jack felt an odd chill run down his spine as he picked it up. His first instinct was to toss it aside, assuming it was just another piece of junk mail or a delivery error. But something about the package made him hesitate. He stared at it for a moment, a strange sensation creeping over him. The package seemed familiar. He opened it carefully, feeling the weight of his own anxiety rising with each movement. Inside the box was a small envelope. He pulled it out, noticing the handwriting immediately. It was in a rush, hurried, but still legible. The same handwriting he remembered from years ago, his brother Luke's. The name Jack was written across the front in bold letters. His heart skipped a beat. Jack's hands shook as he tore open the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded in half. He read it aloud, trying to keep his voice steady. "Jack, if you're reading this, it means I'm finally ready to explain what happened. I've spent years running, hiding, and trying to make sense of everything. But it's time for you to know the truth. I'm not the person you think I am, and I've been forced to live a life I never wanted. I need your help, Jack. I can't do this alone anymore. You'll find everything you need in the old cabin we used to visit, the one near the lake. Come alone, and please, trust me. It's the only way you'll ever understand. Luke." Jack froze, the letter slipping from his hands. It couldn't be. He had spent years wondering where Luke had gone, hoping for some trace, some sign. But this letter, this message, it was a cruel joke, a final trick his mind had played on him. Yet, the handwriting was unmistakable, and the emotion in the letter felt genuine. It wasn't just a message from a stranger. It was from Luke, the brother who had disappeared from his life all those years ago. Jack stood there for a long moment, the letter in his hand, staring at the words. The weight of the message hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't ignore it. He couldn't just move on. This was it. The answer he had waited for, the explanation he had longed for, finally within his grasp. His mind raced. Why had Luke disappeared? What had happened to him all those years ago? What was he involved in? Jack had so many questions, and the letter only made everything more confusing. But one thing was clear. Luke was alive, and he was asking for help. Jack's heart pounded as the decision settled into his mind. He had to go. He had to find the cabin near the lake, the place from their childhood that had always been a sanctuary for them. The place where they had gone to escape, to dream, to share everything. He had no idea what he would find there, but he knew one thing for sure. This was his chance to finally understand the mystery of his brother's disappearance. But as Jack prepared to leave, a lingering doubt gnawed at him. Could he trust this? Could he trust the letter, the message, the promise that everything would finally make sense? And if he did go to the cabin, would he find Luke? Or would he find something else? Something darker than he ever expected? There was no way to know for sure. But Jack couldn't sit back any longer, not knowing the truth. He had to go. He had to face whatever lay ahead. With a deep breath, Jack grabbed his keys, stuffed the letter into his pocket, and walked out of his apartment. The air was thick with anticipation, and his mind raced as he headed for his car. He wasn't just going to find his brother, he was going to find the answers to everything that had haunted him for years. The drive to the cabin took longer than Jack had anticipated. The roads that led to the old lake house were winding, narrow, and unfamiliar now. He hadn't been to this place since he was a teenager, and the memories that flooded back as he passed through the dense woods only added to his anxiety. The trees were thick, their branches heavy with moss, casting eerie shadows on the road. The familiar smell of pine and damp earth made his stomach twist. He remembered the cabin as a safe haven, a retreat where he and Luke had spent so many weekends growing up. It was where they had shared everything: their dreams, their secrets, and even their fights. The place had always been a constant in their childhood, a refuge away from the stress of school and family life. It was supposed to be a place of comfort, not one that would now bring so many unanswered questions to the surface. As Jack drove closer to the lake, his pulse quickened. The letter was still crumpled in his pocket, its presence a heavy reminder of everything he was about to confront. He couldn't shake the thought that the letter might not be real, that it could be a cruel trick, something to get his hopes up, only to have them dashed. But deep down, Jack knew he couldn't ignore it. If there was even the slightest chance that Luke was alive and wanted to explain everything, Jack had to be there. The cabin finally came into view, nestled at the edge of the lake. It looked almost the same as it had all those years ago, weathered but sturdy, the wood a deep brown that blended with the surroundings. The small porch, the rusty swing hanging from the tree nearby, the same old rickety steps leading up to the door. It was as though time had barely touched the place, preserving it in the past. Jack parked his car at the edge of the dirt driveway, his hands shaking as he turned off the engine. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional splash of water against the shore filled the silence around him. Everything felt too quiet, too still, as if the world were holding its breath. He got out of the car, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around, half expecting to see someone watching him from the shadows. The whole place felt like a relic from another time, and yet it was here, untouched by the years that had passed. He slowly walked toward the front door, feeling like an intruder in his own memories. When he reached the door, Jack hesitated for a moment. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his nerves. This was it, the moment that would change everything. He pushed the door open, the old wood creaking in protest. The cabin smelled faintly of dust and mildew, the kind of scent that only comes from abandonment. The dim light filtering in through the small windows made the room feel cold and unfamiliar. It was clear no one had been here in years. Jack stepped inside, his footsteps heavy on the creaky wooden floor. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the familiar features, the worn-out couches, the stone fireplace that had once crackled with warmth during their childhood summers, the old coffee table that still held remnants of the countless games and late-night talks he and Luke had shared. But there was no sign of Luke. There was no trace of the brother who had sent him the letter. The silence pressed in around him, suffocating and heavy. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. The letter had been clear. You'll find everything you need here. But where was it? What was he supposed to find? Jack walked toward the fireplace, his mind racing. He had no idea what he was looking for. The letter didn't offer any specific instructions beyond the location. What was Luke trying to tell him? Was he still here? Or was this just another part of the mystery? His eyes fell on a small table by the window. On it was a weathered envelope, much like the one that had arrived at his apartment. This one was slightly open, as though someone had started to open it and then stopped. Jack walked over, his heart pounding again. He picked up the envelope, noticing immediately that it had no return address, just his name, written in the same hurried handwriting from the first letter. He opened it carefully, not wanting to tear it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and as Jack unfolded it, his eyes widened. This was another letter from Luke. The writing, though different from the first letter, was still urgent, the words filled with the same emotion. Jack, I'm sorry for what I've put you through. I know this must be confusing, but please trust me. I've been hiding for a reason, and it's not what you think. I can't explain everything in writing, but I need you to understand that I didn't choose to disappear. It was the only way I could protect you, and protect myself. The people I was involved with are dangerous, and they won't stop looking for me. They've already found me once, and I barely escaped. If you're reading this, it means you found the cabin. But you can't stay here long. You need to leave before they find you too. I'm close, Jack, but you have to trust me. You need to follow the trail I've left for you, and you'll find the answers to everything. It's the only way to understand why I had to leave. Luke. Jack's hands trembled as he finished reading the letter. His mind was reeling. What had Luke gotten himself into? Who were the people he was hiding from, and why had Luke disappeared in the first place? This wasn't just a story of a brother who had left. It was a story of someone trapped in a dangerous world, forced to leave everything behind for his own safety. The sense of dread Jack had felt since the moment he opened the package intensified. He wasn't just trying to find his brother anymore. He was now caught up in a mystery far bigger than he could have imagined. There were answers here, but they were buried in a web of secrets, and it seemed like Luke was the key. But Jack wasn't sure what to believe anymore. How could he trust a letter when he had spent years wondering if Luke had even been alive? Just as he was about to sit down and try to process what he had read, a loud sound came from outside the cabin. A car engine, footsteps crunching on the gravel. Jack's heart stopped. Was it Luke? Had someone else found him? The sound grew louder, and Jack quickly moved to the window, peeking out through the curtain. There, parked just outside, was a black car. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know who was inside, but he knew one thing. He had to act fast. Whoever was outside the cabin might be the same people Luke was hiding from, and if they were here now, Jack was in danger. Jack's heart pounded as he crouched by the window, peering out at the black car parked outside the cabin. The engine idled, the sound of it humming ominously in the stillness of the surrounding woods. He couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was escalating far faster than he could control. Whoever had arrived wasn't here to help. He was certain of that. His instincts told him that this was more than just a visit. It was a threat. He backed away from the window slowly, trying to keep his movements as quiet as possible. His mind raced as he thought about the letter he had just read. Luke had been hiding, and not just from anyone. There were dangerous people after him. The message had been clear. You need to leave before they find you too. Jack had no idea who they were, but he had a growing sense that this wasn't a typical case of a missing person. This was something far more sinister. The footsteps outside grew louder, closer. Someone was approaching the cabin. Jack's pulse quickened as he searched the small room for a way to escape. The door was still open, but he couldn't risk running out there. If it was someone looking for Luke, they'd be watching the surroundings. His mind raced, trying to think of an exit strategy. He couldn't just hide and wait. He had to figure out who these people were, why they were here, and what they wanted with Luke. Then, his eyes landed on the back door, old and wooden, barely visible through the overgrown bushes behind the cabin. It was a long shot, but it was the only option he had. He moved quickly, slipping through the cabin's interior without making a sound, hoping that whoever was out there wouldn't notice him. As Jack reached the back door, he took a deep breath and pushed it open. The creaking of the hinges drowned out by the sounds of the approaching footsteps. He stepped outside and crouched low, moving as quietly as he could through the overgrown path, leading toward the woods. The trees were thick, and the foliage was dense enough to hide him from view. Jack's heart raced, not just from fear, but from the realization that he was about to step into a world far more dangerous than he could have imagined. He paused for a moment, listening to the sounds around him. The car was still idling, but now the footsteps had stopped. The silence felt unnerving. Was it just one person out there? Or were there more? Jack pushed forward, trying to put as much distance between himself and the cabin as possible, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Something was wrong. As he moved deeper into the woods, Jack's mind flashed back to the letter. "I'm sorry for what I've put you through. I know this must be confusing, but please trust me." Luke's words haunted him. What had Luke gotten involved in? What world had he been hiding in, one that was so dangerous, it had forced him to leave everything behind? His family, his home, his life. Jack pushed forward, determination overtaking his fear. He had to find Luke, and if he was going to find him, he had to uncover the truth. But as Jack moved deeper into the woods, he realized something. This wasn't just about finding his brother anymore. It was about survival. He wasn't the only one looking for answers. Whoever those people were outside the cabin, they were willing to do anything to find Luke. And if Jack wasn't careful, he might end up in the same dangerous situation his brother had found himself in. Minutes later, Jack heard the sound of footsteps again, closer this time. He wasn't sure if they were coming from behind him or if someone else had gotten ahead of him, but he knew they were drawing near. His breathing quickened as he tried to make himself smaller, moving between the trees, hoping to stay hidden. There was no turning back now. He had to keep moving, even if he didn't know where he was going. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. Jack crouched lower, straining to hear. Was he caught? Had they seen him? His heart raced as he pressed his back against a thick tree trunk, trying to steady his breath. Every noise around him seemed amplified, branches snapping, leaves rustling, distant animals scurrying. And then, he heard something else. A voice, faint but clear, cutting through the stillness of the forest. "Did you hear that?" a man said, his voice rough, controlled. The other voice was quieter, almost inaudible. Probably just an animal. Jack held his breath, too afraid to move. The voices grew fainter as the two men continued their conversation, but Jack could hear the unmistakable edge of danger in their words. They weren't here for anything ordinary. Whatever they were after, it wasn't just Luke. It was something more. Something that might cost Jack his life if he wasn't careful. After what felt like an eternity, the voices faded and Jack allowed himself to exhale. He had barely managed to escape their notice. But for how long? How much longer would he be able to keep running before he was caught? He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He had to find out what was going on, and if it meant confronting the men outside the cabin, then he would have to face them. He turned and began walking again, determined to find out where they had gone. He didn't know where he was headed, but he knew this wasn't the time for hesitation. The longer he waited, the greater the chance that the men would catch on to his presence, and he had already made it too far to turn back now. As he moved deeper into the woods, Jack's thoughts raced. The letter, Luke's cryptic words, the dangerous men searching for him. It was all connected, and now Jack had a choice to make. Find his brother and uncover the truth, or run and never look back, leaving everything behind. But Jack didn't know how to run anymore. He didn't know how to walk away. Luke needed him, and the answers were just ahead. The questions were piling up, but Jack was more determined than ever to face them. He was no longer just a man searching for his brother. He was a man searching for the truth, and whatever it took, he wasn't going to stop until he found it. Jack moved deeper into the woods, his footsteps soft on the damp earth, his every sense alert to the sounds around him. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of what was happening. The walls were closing in. Whatever was going on, whoever was looking for Luke, was more complex and dangerous than Jack could have ever imagined. The men who had been searching the cabin were just the beginning. He didn't know who they were, but it was clear they had been following him for a reason. As Jack pushed through the underbrush, he felt an undeniable urgency. He had come this far. following a trail of cryptic letters and hidden messages, and now he was standing on the brink of something bigger than he could have ever prepared for. The truth about his brother was just out of reach, but the deeper he ventured into the woods, the more Jack realized that the answers he sought might be closer than he thought, and yet they were more dangerous than he could ever expect. Eventually, the trees thinned, and Jack found himself at the edge of a small clearing. In the middle of it stood an old cabin, dilapidated and nearly swallowed by the forest. The wooden structure was weathered, its roof sagging, and the front door hanging crookedly on its hinges. It was like something from a forgotten dream, a place that had been abandoned long ago, but it wasn't. Jack knew this was the place. The cabin Luke had written about in his letter. He took a deep breath, stepping cautiously toward the cabin. The clearing around it was eerily quiet, as if the world itself had held its breath. Jack glanced over his shoulder, scanning the surrounding woods for any signs of movement, but there was nothing. The men who had been looking for him were nowhere in sight, but Jack didn't believe for a second that they had given up. No, they were still out there, and they were closing in. The door creaked as Jack pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit room. Inside, everything was just as it had been when Luke had left it. The dusty furniture, the faded curtains, and the familiar smell of old wood and time. But there was something else too, something different. A sense of anticipation hung in the air, as though the cabin itself was holding a secret. Jack's heart thudded in his chest as he moved deeper into the room, trying to suppress the growing sense of dread that gnawed at him. At the far end of the cabin, a small table sat near a window, covered with old maps and papers. On the table was another envelope, unmistakable in its simplicity. Jack's pulse quickened as he approached it. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the thing Luke had left for him. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he picked up the envelope. It was heavier than the others, the paper more substantial, as though it contained something of great importance. Jack tore it open with care, pulling out a thick stack of papers. At the top of the stack was a single photograph, one that made his heart skip a beat. It was a picture of Luke, taken not long before he disappeared. He was standing next to a man Jack didn't recognize, a stranger with cold eyes and a stern expression. But it wasn't just the man that unsettled Jack. It was the location. The picture had been taken at a large, imposing building, something that looked like an old industrial complex, now abandoned and overgrown with ivy. Jack turned the photograph over. On the back, scrawled in Luke's handwriting, was a single sentence. "This is where it all started, Jack. They've been watching me ever since." Jack's mind raced. Who were these people? Why was Luke hiding from them? What had happened in this place that had driven his brother to vanish from the world? This photograph wasn't just a memory. It was a clue, a key to understanding the life Luke had been living all these years. Jack pushed the photograph aside and began sifting through the stack of papers beneath it. As he read, his heart sank. There were notes, detailed, meticulous notes about something Jack couldn't fully comprehend. Words like operations, files, blackmail, classified jumped out at him. Luke had been involved in something far more dangerous than Jack had ever imagined. His brother hadn't just run away to escape his family, he had been running from a powerful organization. An organization that was now hunting him down. Jack's mind struggled to process the information. His brother had been caught up in something far beyond their small-town life. This wasn't about a rebellious teenager or a personal crisis. This was about something much bigger, something that involved people who had the power to disappear others, to make them vanish without a trace. And now it seemed, Jack was in the middle of it. He wasn't just a bystander. He was being drawn into the web of secrets and lies that had consumed Luke's life. And as much as Jack tried to understand, one thing was painfully clear: he wasn't just looking for his brother anymore. He was looking for a way out. Jack looked up from the papers, his gaze lingering on the cabin's small window. He hadn't heard anything in a while, but the silence felt wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching him. The men who had been following him were still out there, and now they knew exactly where he was. Suddenly, the door creaked open behind him. Jack whipped around, his heart in his throat. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a man in dark clothing, his face partially obscured by a hood. He wasn't alone. Behind him, two more men stepped into the cabin, their eyes trained on Jack, their expressions unreadable. "We've been looking for you, Jack," the man in the doorway said, his voice low and cold. "And now, you're going to help us find Luke." Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the three men stepped into the cabin. The silence that had enveloped him for the past few minutes now felt suffocating. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and he could feel the weight of their gaze on him, cold, calculating, and knowing. The men were well trained, their movements deliberate and precise, as though they had done this countless times before. And now, it seemed, it was Jack's turn to be part of their game. The man in the doorway spoke again, his voice low and emotionless, but Jack could hear the underlying threat. "We've been looking for you, Jack, and now, you're going to help us find Luke." Jack's mind raced. The men were here because of Luke, because of the cryptic letters, the mysterious messages, the dangerous trail that had led him straight to this moment. But the reality of the situation hit him harder than anything he had imagined. He wasn't just searching for answers about his brother anymore. He was in the middle of something far bigger than he could have ever anticipated, and he had no idea how deep it went. "What do you want with Luke?" Jack demanded, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the fear rising in his chest. "Where is he?" The man's lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. "We don't need to tell you where he is, Jack. We know you'll come looking for him, and when you do, you'll lead us straight to him." The words made Jack's blood run cold. These men weren't just after Luke, they were after both of them. They knew that Jack had found something, that he was getting closer to the truth, and now they wanted him to help them find Luke, or else. The implications of what they were saying sank in. They had been watching Jack, waiting for the right moment to close in. They knew everything. Jack's mind raced. He had to make a decision. These men weren't here to negotiate. They weren't going to offer him any kind of safe escape. And they were certain of one thing. Jack had no choice but to cooperate. The man in the doorway stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Jack's. "You can't run from this, Jack. It's too late for that. We know what your brother has gotten himself into, and now you're involved too. So let's make this easy. Tell us where he's hiding, and we'll let you walk away." Jack's hands clenched into fists, his thoughts swirling with uncertainty and fear. He didn't know how much longer he could keep up the charade. He couldn't let these men know that he didn't know where Luke was, that the trail of clues had stopped leading him long ago. His mind flashed back to the letters, the photographs, the notes. None of it made sense. But it was clear now that these men knew exactly what Luke had been hiding, and they weren't willing to let Jack go without a fight. "I don't know where he is," Jack said, his voice hoarse with desperation. "I'm trying to find him, just like you are. But I'm not going to tell you anything." The man's expression darkened. He stepped closer, his tone more threatening now. "You're making a mistake, Jack. You don't understand what you're involved in. We're not here to ask for your help. We're here to get what we want, and you'll give it to us, one way or another." Jack's pulse quickened. There was no way out. The door behind him was the only exit, but it was now blocked by the men. His chest tightened as the reality of the situation hit him. If he didn't comply, they wouldn't just let him go. They would take everything from him, just like they had with Luke. His thoughts raced, and in the midst of the chaos in his mind, a sudden realization hit him. He had one card left to play. He wasn't going to give in. He wasn't going to tell these men where Luke was, even if it meant risking his own life. But there was something else. If these men were looking for Luke, if they had been after him for years, there had to be a reason. Luke had known this was coming. He had been running for his life, hiding from something far bigger than Jack could comprehend. And now, Jack had a choice to make. He could cooperate and hope for the best, or he could stand his ground and find a way out. The sound of footsteps outside the cabin grew louder. It was clear that Jack wasn't the only one who had heard the men's arrival. Jack knew that if he didn't act quickly, it wouldn't just be the three men in the cabin who would close in on him. There would be more. He had to make his move, and he had to do it now. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Jack lunged for the small table near the window. He grabbed the stack of papers, the same ones he had found earlier, the ones with the details of Luke's hidden life. He shoved them into his backpack, not caring that the men were watching him closely. He needed to get out of here, and he needed to find Luke. The truth was slipping away from him, but he wasn't about to let these men take control. The man in the doorway stepped toward him, but Jack was already moving. He rushed toward the back door, pushing past the men and darting into the woods. The sound of shouting followed him, but Jack didn't look back. He ran, his feet pounding against the earth, the weight of the backpack heavy on his shoulders. He could hear the men closing in, their footsteps fast and purposeful. They weren't going to let him go easily. But Jack didn't stop. He knew he had to keep moving, keep running, keep fighting. Luke had left a trail for him, and it was time to follow it. Jack wasn't going to be the one who got caught. As he sprinted deeper into the woods, Jack's thoughts were consumed by one question. What was Luke hiding, and why was he willing to sacrifice everything to keep it a secret? The answers were out there, and Jack was going to find them, no matter what it took. If you like this story, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you enjoy stories that embraces your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Let me know in the comments what stood out to you the most. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.